everybody. I'm Laura DeVoe. I'm one of the advisory board members here from Build the Era. Welcome. If this is your first time at a Build the Era event, welcome, welcome. If you are returning to us, thank you so much for sticking with us. Tonight's webinar is going to be wonderful. I'm going to do a couple of intros to tonight's topic and our guest. I am going to ask everybody to please make sure you're muted. If we need to take you off mute, we will, but we want to make sure for the good of the recording that we have everybody muted and everything is in good order. If you have a question, please put it up in the chat, and we will work with you and make sure we get that all taken care of. Today is our event on EV adoption. Build the Era is an education and advocacy organization focused on transportation and infrastructure as it relates to the Department of Transportation. It is volunteer founded and volunteer powered by supporters, volunteers and staffers, as well as people who came to the Pete Buttigieg train following his 2020 presidential campaign. Build the Era's purpose is to connect citizens from across America to the Department of Transportation by the following ways: educate and inform the public as to what the Department of Transportation does and does not do and why it matters; educate and inform the public to the role that the infrastructure plays in America's quality of life; provide training and guidance on how to engage with local and federal elected officials on matters related to DOT initiatives; provide training and guidance on how to advocate for causes relating to relational organizing, using relational organizing as a primary tool; and create measurable effectiveness and change. Build the Era is committed to making the Department of Transportation's role in American movement understood by citizens and activating them to engage for smart and equitable investments by the DOT and for better multimodal planning in their communities. Thank you for being here to help contribute to the attainment of our mission, vision, and values. Tonight, I am pleased to introduce all of you to Loren McDonald. Following a 30-plus year career as a consultant, marketing executive, and marketing technology evangelist, in 2017, Loren founded EVAdoption. EVAdoption is a consulting and analyst firm that provides data, market analysis, and consulting services to companies looking to understand the threats and opportunities that the transition to electric vehicles will present. Loren has presented on 200 plus webinars and delivered more than 300 presentations in 19 countries on both marketing as well as marketing and electric vehicle topics. His research and expert commentary are frequently sought by the media, and he has been quoted and his EV data used by the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the USA Today, among many other news outlets. Tonight's event is about EV adoption. It is not about autonomous vehicles, so I want to make sure we're clear on that. I have previewed the presentation. Loren and I got to spend a little bit of time together last week getting prepped, and I am absolutely thrilled to welcome Loren McDonald to Build the Era, and I can't wait for all of you to hear from him. So I'm going to put myself on mute so I can cough, and Loren, go ahead.
Great, thanks, Laura. Thanks for that great introduction, and welcome everybody. I'm really excited about tonight's. It's still I'm not on the West Coast, and it's still actually fairly early, so it's about what 4:20 or so. But really excited. This is obviously my favorite topic, and love to educate people about electric vehicles. As you heard, as I spent years in the marketing landscape as a marketing technology evangelist, so I'd fly around the world, I guess creating gas emissions, but I'd fly around the world educating companies and marketers around best practices and things like that. And that's really what I'm doing now with companies around electric vehicles. So really excited to have the opportunity to educate all of you, but also more importantly, I want this really obviously to be a two-way conversation today and answer a lot of your questions. But let's go ahead and dive in. As Laura mentioned, I have several slides to kind of get you thinking and hopefully answer or spur some additional questions, but bring everybody sort of up to date on where we actually are at. So let's go ahead and dive in. All right, there we go. So, the first thing is that one of the things that if all of you haven't come across this already is that the electric vehicle and the EV charging industry is driven by engineers, meaning they have their own language, they love acronyms, and they use terms and phrases that none of us as consumers can understand. And they don't agree on them. So it's really, it's kind of this mess of terminology and things. So I like to just start with a couple of terms that we use in the industry so everybody understands when I use one of these acronyms or terms, they know what I'm talking about. So, kind of in reverse order, instead of calling them gas cars, the industry's decided in the last couple of years to use the term ICE. So if oftentimes you'll hear, like I hear Mary Berry, the CEO of GM all the time now referring to ICE, right? So it's become the sort of the standard language for the industry to refer to gas or diesel powered cars as ICE, standing for internal combustion engine. Then EV, the term we use, EV, most of you probably just call them electric cars, but the electric vehicle and the EV acronym actually stands for two different types of electric vehicles. So the one that most of you probably think of, we refer to as BEVs, battery electric vehicles, and those are the electric vehicles that only have a battery and electric motor. They have no gas-powered engine. Whereas plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, not to be confused with regular hybrid vehicles, but plug-in hybrid vehicles, PHEVs, actually fundamentally, almost all of them are gas-powered cars. So a gas-powered vehicle that you could just go and buy today. But what the automaker has done is they've added a small battery and the ability to plug in and charge that. So the way you replenish the battery is not through the gas engine or anything like that. I mean, there's some nuances around that, but we won't get into those sort of, the outliers. But basically, you recharge that battery same as you do a full battery electric. But the nifty thing about plug-in hybrids, I'm actually a fan of them, but a lot of people, purists, don't like them. But the nice thing about plug-in hybrids, those especially they have 30, 40, 50 miles of range, is you can drive them basically around town to and from work, all on the electric power, and then you get home at night and plug it in and recharge it. And people that are avid users of those plug-in hybrids that have like the 35, 40, 50 miles of range talk about almost never having to put gas in. So a lot of old people that used to drive the Chevrolet Volt with a V that GM no longer sells talked about they maybe only put in 1 or 2 gallons of gas the entire year because it had enough electric range that they'd never, almost never had to use the gas engine. But when they would go on a longer trip, obviously that was there. So at any rate, hopefully that's helpful just to sort of bring everybody up to speed on the acronym soup. And so then actually let's sort of bring that to life a little bit. So the industry also likes to use the term electrified. And when they use the term electrified, they're actually including regular hybrids in that. So think about the most famous hybrid of all time, the Toyota Prius that sort of started that whole movement. The automakers, when you hear somebody like a Toyota or a Hyundai or even Ford or whatever, when they talk about we're going to electrify our portfolio, they 99.9% of the times are including regular hybrids in that. So you have to kind of deconstruct that, ask tough questions, and understand, what does that portfolio actually look like. But what I thought I'd do is sort of bring that to life. Here's an example, and this is not common. There's sort of only a few of these types of models like this where you can buy multiple versions of powertrains. So this is the Kia Niro. So the Nero on the left is the base one, is actually a regular hybrid. So they don't make just a gas version of the Nero, but they have the regular hybrid. And down at the bottom, what you can see is just to kind of help bring it to life so you understand it. I've got the size in kilowatt hours, and don't worry about what that means. It doesn't really matter, but just think about it as almost like the equivalent of gallons of gas, right? So the bigger number, the bigger tank, the more, the farther you can go. So the regular hybrid has less than a 2 kilowatt hour battery pack in the Nero, but the plug-in hybrid, you see there in the middle, has almost a 9 kilowatt hour battery pack. And I'm not exactly sure of I should have checked. The Nero, I think, has about 25 miles of electric range, I think. And then the full Nero EV, the BEV, has a 64 kilowatt hour battery. So you can see, actually, it's like, about 7 times the battery is basically like, has 7 times the capacity in energy density. In that case, the Nero EV versus the plug-in hybrid. But you can also see, kind of the bad news, if you will, is how the price difference goes up. Now, obviously, and we'll get to it later on, but state and federal and utility incentives will help sort of fix that. And also every year the cost of the batteries is getting cheaper and cheaper and more efficient and more energy dense. So that's going to dramatically come down as well. All right, so just a little fun. I created this chart a couple of months ago for a conference presentation I did, but I thought I would share it with all of you, because I think a lot of people actually don't understand kind of the history and the context of where we're actually at today. So I did a little fun, kind of like the old, caveman and walking up to Homo sapien and, starting to stand up and stuff. So I did sort of the parallel with that to just kind of help bring this to life, to show where we're at. So a lot of people don't understand that actually electric vehicles were actually more popular than gas-powered vehicles 120 years ago. We actually started in the auto industry with most cars being electric back in the 1890s. And electric cars were sort of dominant until about the 1920s. And then as gas stations started being built out, we just, for whatever reason, it happened. I'm old, but I'm not that old. I wasn't around back then. But, because of that sort of range and the infrastructure being built out, and sort of that freedom and stuff, gas-powered cars took off, and basically electric cars died for about 100 years. But a few started coming back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and earlier this decade. Everybody on this chat today, I'm sure, is familiar with the GM EV1 and the who killed the electric car and all that stuff. But there was actually several other EVs that came out back then, but all of them had 50, 75, 80, less than 100 miles of range or so, and it sort of never took off and sort of died out again. But then it was really about 15 years ago, first with the sort of the Tesla Roadster, but then really what I call the beginning of the modern era of EVs, especially in the US, is December of 2010. So basically 2011, when Nissan launched the fully electric Leaf and Chevrolet launched the Volt plug-in hybrid. And that's really when, if you look at all the data and you look at when sales started, it's really at that period. So it's like 2011. So really only 10 years has sort of been the beginning of again, what I call sort of the modern era. So where are we today? I like to use, I like to say where we're at today is kind of the BlackBerry phase. So if you use the analogy of smartphones, we're not even to like the iPhone yet. We're still kind of, I oftentimes, I was a keynote speaker at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I held up a Palm Trio and nobody knew what it was, but hopefully some of you on this call maybe owned a Palm Trio back in a couple decades ago. But in essence, it's the BlackBerry phase, right? We're still early. We're still in that sort of transition, and the analogous smartphone to EVs are starting to get popular. Range is going up, more models coming out, affordability, etc. But we'll probably, I don't know that we'll ever hit the iPhone moment, meaning one single EV being what gets everybody. to all of a sudden go, wow, I need an electric vehicle, like a lot of us thought we needed a smartphone. But I think a lot of different factors are going to come together: range, cost, charging speed, battery density and affordability, and just the number of models. And I've got some slides on all of that here in a second. But I think, in essence, we're still probably 5-6 years away from when we're going to start to see EVs go mainstream in America, very different from other parts of the world. So speaking of that Nissan Leaf, just to kind of, bring this to life on how far we've come in the last 10 years. So in that December 2010, that sort of first modern EV, the Nissan Leaf, it had 73 miles of range. We say EPA because that's sort of the standard in the US. But today you can get this. So Nissan has two versions of the Leaf, but they're more expensive, bigger battery version. You can get 225 miles of range. So think about that. In the last 10 years, right, this one particular EV has basically, tripled its battery range. And I'm not suggesting that the next 10 years we're going to see a tripling, but we're going to see significant increase in energy density of EVs. And we already have today, the Lucid Air. I don't know if any of you have heard of Lucid, but the company actually, went public a couple months ago, and they just launched their first EV, the Dream Edition. And you have to save your pennies for this one. It's $170,000. But yes, it's 170. I know you said you were telling me, Laura, that you saw one the other day and didn't know.
I literally saw one over the weekend, and I went, "What the hell is that thing?" And then Loren sent me this slide deck today, and I went, "Oh, that's what I saw." Yeah,
it's absolutely gorgeous. I actually had the chance to. I've met with executives of the company multiple times. Had a chance to go to their factory in Arizona last month and got to test drive it. And it's an amazing car. I actually think it's probably the best car ever made. It's just a phenomenal piece of vehicle, as it was designed from the ground up to be the most efficient car on the planet. And from an electric vehicle perspective, it is. But so it gets 520 miles of range. Nothing else is close to that. Not even any of the Teslas, et cetera. But again, it's sort of a steep sticker price. But in the next couple of years, they're coming out with a slightly more affordable version. So about a $70,000 to $80,000 version that will have 406 miles of range, and some in between that. But you can, but we're getting there. Which sort of brings me to my next slide and sort of point is, anytime you talk to people that don't own an EV and they're thinking about getting an EV, that's sort of the old term of range anxiety and how much range and how far can it get. My car's got 400 miles of range, a gas car, 22-gallon tank, right? Like, and people are always trying to make those apples to apples comparison. And hopefully we'll get into this in the Q&A and stuff, how you have to sort of think differently. But as you can see here, each year we've sort of gone up, right? So it's not only as just more EV models have come out with sort of, bigger batteries and more range, but as you saw with the Leaf, the batteries are just getting more efficient, sort of like, we used to talk about Moore's Law in computers, right? It's not quite that same, but we do see, potentially 5 to 10% increase in density like every 2 years, right? So you can see here, we've basically doubled the average range of electric vehicles. And in this case, obviously, these are the full battery electric vehicles, has basically doubled since 2013. And my forecast is we'll hit over 300 miles by about average by 2025 and north of 350 by 2030, or excuse me, yes, by 2030. And one of the things there have been, Laura, there's been dozens of surveys of consumers in America over the last several years, and every single one of them has pointed to 300 miles of being sort of the magic number that the majority of consumers say is what they want and expect, not what they need necessarily, but what they want and expect before they will consider buying an EV. Now, some people say, I'm not going to consider an EV till it has 500 miles of
Mhm.
range, and some are at 200 or whatever. But most
Right.
people think that 300 miles. It's sort of become the self-fulfilling prophecy that
Mhm.
everybody has said it, so everybody sort of thinks it, whether it's what you actually need or not.
Right. So I
But
think it's interesting because it's almost, as you've been explaining this, Lauren, it almost has me thinking about like when I moved from books to a Kindle
right,
and how you kind of consider a page. And I would say, what page are you on? And I can't remember. And at one point they changed when I upgraded to a different Kindle, it moved from the Kindle version to you can actually now tell what page it's on.
right.
And I was like, okay, so clearly they got this from the consumer saying, I want to know what page I'm on. And so as you're talking with us about how to consider gas mileage versus how far what the battery will take you, it reminds me of that. So
Yeah, yeah.
thank you for this. Yeah.
And I have what's probably my most important slide, sort of when we get into EV charging here in a few minutes, a bit later. But I think hopefully that'll sort of open people's eyes. But let's keep this moving because I know we want to get to open it up to Q&A. But sort of where are we at? So the reality is, as I mentioned, we're kind of in that BlackBerry phase, and so the majority of the automakers actually only have 0 or 1 EVs on the market today, right? So if you look at this, out of basically 37 major automakers that sell vehicles in the U.S., 23 of them do not have one of those full battery electric vehicles, and about 2/3 either have only one EV, whether it's a plug-in hybrid or DV, or nothing at all. And that nothing part is going to change pretty quickly. Several of those have EVs coming out like literally in the next month or two, or the next couple of months and stuff like that. But my point and why I included this slide is just to sort of show that if you go into today, if you walk into a dealership of a lot of different brands, many of them may not even have an EV available to sell, or they might only have 1 or 2. So we're just at the beginning of giving consumers choice, which brings up the next slide. So a lot of people aren't aware of this, but by the end of this year, so another 45 days, there are actually going to be 71, by my tracking, electric vehicles available for sale in the US, and about 2/3 of those are those plug-in hybrids, and I think about 25 or so are the full sort of battery electric. So there's actually a lot of EVs available today, and that's going to increase, by my forecast, up to more than 220 by 2030. So every year, we actually started this year, I think at 52, if memory serves me. So we've literally added like 20 new EVs available in the US this year. It's just crazy how many are sort of coming out in the path. Now, they may or may not be affordable, or the ones that you particularly want, et cetera. But dozens and dozens of these are coming out. So we're going to basically triple the number of EV models available in the US in the next 10 years or so. And one of the interesting things that's happening is all the automakers are most of them are approaching EVs sort of very differently. Some are going all in. Volkswagen is committed heavily. Ford is starting to commit. Some I won't mention by name, sort of dragging their feet, if you will, going kicking and screaming. Some are doing, heavy on hybrids and plug-in hybrids. Some are going like Volkswagen only. They're going to just have gas cars and full battery electric BEVs, other a mix, whatever it is. But the other interesting thing is some, look at like Ford. Ford was basically a non-player up until about January of this year. And then all of a sudden the company has just completely done a change with their new CEO, and they're going aggressively on EVs. They launched the Mustang Mach-E. Next year, they're coming out with the Ford F-150 Electric Lightning, which I think is the closest thing we're going to have to the iPhone moment. This is, as everyone probably knows on this call, the Ford F-150 has been for 42 straight years the #1 selling vehicle in America. It is America. It is iconic. And the fact that, Ford is coming out with actually a truly amazing version of this next year. It's going to have 11 plugs. It's affordable, about the base ones, like under $40,000. Has this massive front. I mean, it's just an amazing vehicle. And I think this is going to be, a massive step to getting the middle of America to start thinking about and embracing EVs, like those of us on the coast that do currently. But I'm not going to go through all of these, but you get the sense is that many of the automakers are taking their iconic models and electrifying them. And in most cases, that means a completely different version, but in some cases, it means taking sort of the base, like the Ford F-150, and changing up the powertrain and things like that. All right, here's might be my most important slide in the presentation today from kind of a consumer perspective. So when you think about the difference between gas-powered cars, those ICE vehicles, and electric cars, yes, the powertrain is different, right? You've got, instead of a gas engine and a fuel tank, you've got a battery and electric motor. Other than that, the cars, it's still a car, right? Or a truck or an SUV, but it's basically the same. What's really different from a consumer behavioral perspective, and the issue and the big hurdle to get people comfortable with switching from a gas car to electric car, is not how it drives, because that's an amazing experience. It's how you refuel it, right? And so refueling is actually very different with electric vehicles. And it's something that you don't really understand intuitively until you actually own and drive an electric vehicle for like a couple of months. It sort of takes a little bit for it to get comfortable, and you make mistakes and do things wrong. But the way I like to explain EV charging is that it's EV parking, meaning, and what the point of this beautiful slide is that my 22-year-old daughter designed for me, is the way we refuel a gas car is that we drive it till it gets down to whatever our comfort zone is. For some of us, that's like when it hits E, or maybe even below E. For a lot of us, it's when it gets to like a quarter or an eighth of a tank, we start getting a little nervous and we find a gas station and we fill it up to full. That's not what you do with an electric vehicle. With an electric vehicle, it's what I refer to as a replenishment model. So basically, you start the day not at full, but you actually start with your battery at 80%. And if you've, a lot of us have sort of learned this with smartphones, like you don't want to charge it all the time to 100%, because that reduces the battery life. So the rule of thumb with an EV is you charge it up to 80% for your daily use. So those commutes, taking the kids to soccer practice, driving to the doctor, to, Safeway, like whatever it is, but you sort of your everyday daily routine, everything from other than when you're going on a road trip, you basically charge it up to 80%, and then you go out and you drive your 20, 30, 40, 50, 80, 100 miles, whatever it is that day. And when you come home, if you have a garage, which we'll get to in a minute, you pull into the driveway and you plug it in, and it starts charging at midnight or whatever, and you wake up in the morning and your car's back to that 80%. So it's a replenishment model. And when you're out and driving about, so you go and let's say you go on a road trip and you're going and you're spending the night at a hotel or something, right? A lot of hotels increasingly will have charging, most of them free. And if they do and it's available, like you plug in and wake up in the morning and it's charged. Or you go shopping, right? And like Target increasingly has both the Tesla superchargers and a lot of other what we call level 2 chargers, which I'll explain in a minute. But basically, it's whenever your car is parked, it's an opportunity to add fuel to basically charge that up. So the second thing that
Loren, I'm sorry, I'm going to just jump in. We have a couple questions, and so it's
please do.
Pat has asked, does it stop at 80, or one has to stop it at 80%? And so can you just clarify that?
Yeah, great. No, great. Yeah, I was hoping you would interrupt me. I don't want to just foam at the mouth.
That's okay.
Yeah, so most EVs have either in the app or in the sort of the navigation screen in the car, because increasingly all cars have these screens, right? So you basically, you can set that. So you can just go it. So you set it by default at 80%. And then it'll basically just do that every night. And then if you're going on a road trip, like the next day, you just go in and you move it up to 100%. But basically you can control that. You can have it, whatever you want. I have a Tesla Model S, and it has sort of like markings in the sort of in the screen in the settings. So, you can just sort of set it to those lines and stuff. But yes, you absolutely control that. And what I mentioned about the charging at midnight, maybe this is something we'll get into sort of in the Q&A as well, is increasingly utilities have what's called TOU, time of use rates. So they have special EV charging rates. So they don't want you to charge your EV at 6 o'clock at night in the middle of the summer when everybody's fired up their stoves, their TVs, their air conditionings, all the lights are on because everybody's home, like whatever it is. They want you to charge during non-demand peak time. So you actually get much lower rates, electricity rates, to charge at night. So that's why mine, so you have a timer. And so my car charges automatically every night at 12:30 at night. And it's like everything, it's whether it's in the app on your mobile phone or in the car, you control that.
It's like setting your coffee pot. Yeah.
Yep,
Okay.
Yep. Was there another one?
Yeah, there was one question about the cost of the actual electric bill, but you're about to get into that. So go ahead.
Okay, I'll come to that in a second. But I think the next point I was going to just make that's really important is that that first one of sort of the difference of replenishment. The second thing to think about is that when we think about refueling a gas-powered vehicle, it's a centralized model, right? We don't have gas stations at our house. I mean, few people do, but most of us don't. We have to drive somewhere to a gas station. And whether it's on our way to work or to and from, or on a road trip, whatever it is, but we still have to sort of, it's centralized, there's 140,000 gas stations in the US, whatever, we have to go out of our way. Majority of your charging, for most of us, it's 95% of your charging. So if you do the math, that's like 350 days out of 365, whatever that math is, right? We charge at home. And if you live in a single family home, which about 55% of American households do, it's generally pretty easy, right? You pull into the garage, or if your garage is full of Pelotons and storage and stuff like that, you can't pull into the garage, right? I look at my neighborhood, these people, it drives me crazy. 3-car garages, and they have like all their cars parked out in the driveway.
On the driveway.
Right. But you can, like you see here, the one on the left, you can actually see the chargers on the outside. But regardless, most of us, you just, like we said, you come home from work or whatever it is, the chores and stuff, and you plug in, your car's fully charged the next day. Where it gets a little more difficult is the 35 to 40%. And I know Bill, who's sort of behind the scenes on this webinar today, in the chat, we were talking about this. He lives in a high-rise building, that it gets more complicated if you live in an apartment and condo, because you don't control your own EV charging destiny and stuff. But still, increasingly, apartments and owners are installing EV charging because they want to keep their tenants and that type of thing. And condos is a little bit more complex, because a lot of condo homeowners associations don't understand EV charging, and they rebel at it and that type of thing. But increasingly, I think there's now 8 states that have EV charging, I forget the exact name of it, right to charge. I think it's called right to charge laws, where homeowners associations cannot prohibit you from installing EV charging. You have to pay for it and pay for it, and usually it requires a separate meter and all that type of thing. But the point of this slide, and again, we'll get into sort of the detail of some of these things during the Q&A, but the point of this is just to think differently, that with an EV, you wake up every morning with a fully charged EV, unless you don't have this access to charge at home. And then obviously, you have to go out to a public charging station. Do you want me to address the sort of the cost thing here? I mean,
yeah, I think it would be good to talk about if there's data out there about what does this turn into in terms of your pocketbook, in terms of your increase in or what does it look like in terms of your electric bill? And there was a comment about apartment buildings where landlords refusing to spend money to install charging stations. So
yeah, I could talk about that topic for an hour, but so the first part is, so the electricity costs varies by utility. It can vary dramatically by utility throughout the country. It can vary by the time of day, and those as I mentioned, those special EV charging rates. So I'm not going to necessarily throw out any numbers here, but for most people, you're going to spend less money on charging your electric vehicle than you are on your gas bill. Typically, it might be a half to a third or something like that. But it can vary, obviously, depending on how much you drive, where you live. Are you charging at home versus paying for it out of a public charger and stuff. But generally speaking, it's going to cost you less in electricity to refuel your electric vehicle than you're going to spend on gas at a gas station. That's sort of the simplest way to sort of answer that.
Great.
So let's talk briefly about sort of charging types, because this is where, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is where the industry drives me bonkers, right? Because it's a bunch of engineers that don't understand consumers and marketing. And so they have all these complicated terms. I mean, like, who came up with J1775, right? As a name for a charging connector. But let's start on sort of the left side. So there are basically three types and speeds of EV chargers. So we refer to level 1, level 2, and most people call the other one, the third one, DC fast charging, so direct current fast charging, but a lot of people call it level 3. In fact, one of the things I uncovered from one of the charging apps is they told me they interviewed their customers, and people on the East Coast say level 3, and everybody else in the country says DC fast charger. Go figure, right? We can't even agree on what to call the same thing. But let's go back to the left. So level 1 is just a fancy name for 120 volts. So your standard wall outlet. It's convenient. Every building on the planet has at least one of these. So they're ubiquitous. The problem with them is they don't put out. Think of it as, I think maybe one of the best way to explain this as I go through this, think about sort of level 1 is sort of like a small, sort of a garden hose, right? And level DC is sort of, think about one of those big 6-inch fire hoses from a fire hydrant, and and level 2 is maybe a 3/4 1-inch fire hose. So it's sort of about the amount of power, in this case electricity, that can be pumped through in to charge your car. And none of us care about that. What we care about is, so how long does it take? Right. And so level 1, and again, there's so many factors into this that, maybe we'll get into some of this in some of the questions, but, it can take 24 hours to basically, replenish and recharge a couple hundred mile range electric vehicle with level 1, typically level 2 overnight with 240. So 240, that's almost every house on the planet has at least one 240 outlet, because that's what your washer and dryer run on. So the sort of the nifty thing here is that if you have a washer and dryer in your garage, then it's really easy. You don't actually have to spend money on a special charger, a level 2 special charger. You can if you want. But if you don't want to spend any money, you can actually just plug in to that 240 wall outlet in your garage, and it charges relatively quickly. As I mentioned, your battery will be full when you wake up in the morning. Now there are some different, you can get sort of faster speed. So like when I got our first Tesla, I thought, like most people, I had to go out and spend all this money and do this stuff. I upgraded my panel, had a special electrician who specialized in EVs come in and said, oh, you've got to upgrade, right? So I did a new panel and I went to Tesla wall charger. So the whole thing cost me like, $1,700 to sort of upgrade my electrical system, run conduit, new panel, and the $500 wall charger. You don't have to do that, right? If you have that sort of 240 outlet, you can just sort of plug into that and you're going to be fine. You're going to get almost the speed that somebody like me gets. The other thing you can do, and there's a lot of companies coming into the space with innovative products, and there's some that are like a splitter. So basically you can leave your washer and dryer plugged in and your sort of your cable for your cord for your electric vehicle, and it'll just sort of switch it to your washer and dryer or to your electric vehicle and stuff. And so these things are getting smarter, so that's an option. Yeah, was there a question?
Well, and I think that just an observation, Loren, I was on Cape Cod this summer vacationing, and I saw somebody with one of these level 1 chargers at a rental property that they were using. So to me, it makes sense that, if you own an electric vehicle, owning a level 1 charger, as well as either your level 2 or 3, whatever's at your house, do people do that?
So all EVs come with, and they're often in the frunk, we call the front, that front part where there is no engine. It's sort of like an extra trunk, but it's in the front. So every EV comes with charging cables and adapters, and so they all come with the ability to use all three of these. And so yeah, also all you have to do is you pull out that cable, and if you're living at home using this all the time, it's going to be out anyway. And so yeah, you don't need a special charger. You just use that cable. Like you can sort of see it in the drawing there. It's just a cable that you plug into the wall outlet. And there are level 1 like charging stations that you can buy for like a couple $100, but it's kind of not really needed. And as I mentioned, level 2, you can do the same thing. You can just plug in using that cable and adapter into a 240 outlet, or you can spend several $100s or over $1,000, excuse me, to upgrade your system if you want the fastest speed possible in your house. But again, it's probably not necessary.
And why don't you take a sip of water? But we do have a question about, and I'm wondering if it works here or somewhere else, but people have asked the question about living up north where the weather's cold, and effects on the battery and how long that lasts. I'm not sure if it's here or somewhere later in the presentation.
Yeah, I can. Let's run with it. I'll go with it now, but I'll come back to sort of the final couple of columns here on this slide. But yeah, that's a common question, and those of us that live like where I do in California, we don't even know how to spell the word cold, right? And so this weather issue is like it's foreign to us. But no, but in all seriousness, yes, it's very real for those people who live in the Midwest or East Coast where it gets very cold. So yes, so two things. One is yes, cold and heat as well affects batteries and stuff. So increasingly, what the automakers are doing is they're putting in like what's called battery management systems, and so they all have coolant systems. So believe it or not, the batteries actually come with like coolant, like what's almost in your regular gas car radiator, that runs through and keeps the battery cool. So they're working on the opposite way. So when it's cold, to sort of heat the battery up. So in fact, Tesla and a lot of EVs, when you're driving on a road trip and you put in where you're going and it knows which charging station you're going to stop at, it goes into a special mode where it actually heats up the battery even more so it can accept higher powered charging. So So there's sort of all, and if you Google, charging an EV in cold weather, there's all sorts of tips and things like that you can do. So, you basically make sure that it's up and running like before you actually drive. And when I say up and running, it just means that it's sort of like on, nothing's actually happening,
Yeah.
right? But it just sort of, turn the radio on, like whatever. There's things you can do so that it starts using the battery, it starts heating up. So when you're actually ready, right, it'll be warmer and you'll have a little bit more range. And then charging, it takes longer to charge a very cold battery. So again, there's sort of these cold weather techniques of sort of warming it up. And so that's why if you can park your car inside in the garage, it'll keep that battery a bit warmer than if it's sitting out in 30 below or whatever it is in Minnesota. But yeah, so it's the cold weather issue is real and it's an issue. But again, there's things that the automakers are doing to lessen that issue. And also, there's a lot of, just like I said, these best practices and tips of sort of keeping your battery warm and things like that lessens that. But the last thing, and just, when you think about the EV that you want to buy, like if you're living in one of those cold weather areas, you may decide that you want to buy an EV that has longer range, a bigger battery, because of those sort of cold weather issues, where you might decide you can get by with significantly, shorter range, smaller battery pack if you live in, Arizona or California or something like that. So hopefully that answers that question.
It does. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah. So let's finish up this slide. So the last piece, as I mentioned, we've gone through level 1, level 2, and now sort of level 3 DC fast chargers. And so for most of you, you've probably, if you're not sort of familiar with this, but you've probably heard of the Tesla superchargers. Those are those red and white, almost look like gas pumps, but you've probably, even if you don't own a EV or know much about electric vehicles, you've probably seen these. That is the Tesla branded version, but there's a number of different versions of these and different EV charging networks. But those DC fast chargers, or what some people call level 3, are much more powerful, but they also require a significant amount of electricity, right? In some of these, the amount of electricity it requires, the power of these is really significant. So you can't just put them anywhere. Oftentimes, if you're like a side host, let's say you were a restaurant or a hotel or your Target or something like that, and you want to install 10 of these DC fast chargers, you're going to have to work with the utility and bring in probably additional power, right? It gets very expensive. The most expensive of these cost about $250,000 a piece, and the cheapest are about 25,000, but to install them is about 50,000. The average DC fast charger costs about $150,000 between labor, pulling that power, the hardware, software, all of that kind of stuff. So when if we get into it, the infrastructure bill and that many billions of dollars that's going to go to build out EV charging in America. These are very, very expensive and very power intensive, but we need them for road trips, right? If you're going, down Interstate 95 and East Coast, you're going Milwaukee to Chicago, you're going where I live in the Bay Area to LA, you've got to stop once or twice to add range to your car. You want these things to be sort of pretty fast. So it's absolutely fundamental and critical. The last thing I'll say about these things is where it gets even more complicated is different electric vehicles can only accept certain levels of speed. So not all of them can charge at the super fast speeds. So, I have a saying that range anxiety is being replaced by charger anxiety, meaning that in the coming years, with almost all EVs having around 300 miles of range, that what people increasingly, when you're shopping for an EV, what you're going to look for is what is the charging capacity, meaning can it charge at these super high speeds? And and sort of other factors like that, like what is it sort of charging speed and capability. The last thing I'll mention on this side is really to sort of focus on the two things in that green box that I put. So these are the connectors. So think about that like with your iPhone or Android device, like the actual sort of connector. We have all these different connectors. So this is, one of the things we shot ourselves in the foot in this industry. We have a bunch of different connectors. But the Chatamo one, which was out of Japan, is basically dying in the US. So that's going away. So that's becoming a non-issue. The Nissan Leaf had that and a couple of other, but that's basically dying out. And the J1775 is just sort of your standard charging plug, but the one below it, the CCS, is a combination. So it has that standard AC charging. So for level 1 and level 2, and the sort of the two little ones at the bottom there is for your sort of your fast charger, right? So and then Tesla, right? And Tesla, as everybody knows, has their own connector, their own charging networks and stuff. The good news is Tesla is supposedly, we keep waiting, going to be opening up their charging network to non-EVs. And so because they're the largest fast charging network by like 3 to 1, that's going to open up the number of available DC fast chargers to people that have a non-Tesla pretty significantly, but you're going to have to go out and download the Tesla charging app and spend like $500 on the adapter, right? So it's not quite as simple as we'd all hoped. So but hopefully that helps explain what is the most confusing, confounding, and messy part of owning an EV is this sort of these charging types and connectors.
That's helpful.
So the last thing I'll mention about charging is just my favorite, which is what we just talked about is one-way charging. So meaning electricity coming into your battery, charging it so you can drive your electric vehicle. The real game changer, what I think is kind of that iPhone moment that we may or may not have that I mentioned at sort of the beginning of this, is what's called bidirectional charging, or vehicle to grid, vehicle to home. And there's several other terms that I won't get into, but as you can see here with the Ford F-150, which comes out next year, you will be able to actually power your home for like potentially up to 3 days. It's like if you're sort of careful with how much power you use, but also if you're like a contractor and those 11 plugs, you can power, saws and drills and all sorts of things from it. But the idea of turning electric vehicles into mobile energy storage vehicles is the most exciting part of the future. And being able to, like during those peak demand times, actually get paid by utility to send electricity out to the grids to power your neighbor's house when those air conditioners and everything are sort of fired up at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night during the middle of the summer. We're not there yet. The utilities are sort of dragging their feet on this, and there's a lot of things that have to happen, but the technology is there, and we're gonna start to get there in the next couple of years. And almost every electric vehicle that will be coming out in the next few years will have this bidirectional charging capability at some level. All right. The number one thing that people come to my website, EVAdoption, for is understanding tax credits and incentives and stuff like that. It's just been insane how much traffic and questions I get on this. So I thought it was important to sort of touch on this. So what this slide is it talks about what's coming up with the proposed change, which we thought might get approved this week. Now it's sounding like, and maybe Laura, it sounded like more like what I'm hearing is maybe next week or December. Now is what I'm hearing is when we might get approval on the build back part of this, which includes the changes in the EV tax credit. But most of you are probably aware that today you can get up to a $7,500 tax credit. So it means if you bought an EV today, then come next year, let's say April, you do your tax return. If you have $7,500 worth of tax liability, it's now zero, right? So you get to sort of offset that, unless you buy a Tesla or a General Motors EV, because they already used up their 200,000 manufacturing sort of credits, if you will. But all of that is going to go away. And so most likely starting January 1st, that cap goes away, and Tesla and General Motors EVs will be eligible again for the tax credit. But the rules and all the factors going into it to change, I'm not going to go through all of this, just touch on a couple of key points. One is that $7,500 maximum tax credit is going to go up to $2,500. But how you get there changes. So there'll be a $4,000 base. So basically, any EV that's qualified will get 4,000. But then if there's a certain minimum size battery pack of 40 kilowatt hours for the next several years, then it changes. That's another 3,500. So that gets you back to that 7,500. And here's where it gets political and stuff, which we won't get into. But the current legislation says if the EV is manufactured, is assembled in the US by union workers, it'll get an additional $4,500 credit. As of today, there's only like 3 EVs that would qualify for that. And even like the Mustang Mach-E that I showed at the beginning is actually manufactured in Mexico. And a lot of EVs are, you know, even of the US automakers are made in Canada and stuff. So, but anyway, going forward, if this passes the way it is, it's something that you may want to consider, right? Is not just your favorite brand or EV, but if the tax credit's important, you might actually want to care about where is it made and things like that. And then there's also what's going to be introduced is some manufacturing caps. Right now, there's no cap. If you bought a EV that cost $200,000, it qualifies, you know, it would qualify for the credit. That's going to change. There's going to be some caps, also some household income, adjusted gross income caps, but they're so high that I'm going to dare say that 99% of us on this call won't be affected by it. The most important other aspect of this, and then I'll move on unless Lori, unless you have any questions.
Yeah, there was one question related to this slide. Will the $7,500 for this year be locked in for my taxes next April, even if new legislation passes before the end of the year?
So an earlier version of this a few months ago had it retroactive to May 24th. That seems to be gone from the current version. So yeah, so if you're thinking about buying an EV in the next 45 days, you might want to, you know, the implication here, you might want to wait till January 1st. But again, you know, this isn't passed yet, but as I understand it right now in the current legislation, it is not retroactive. So if you bought it on December 31st, yeah, you might be losing out on, you know, whatever that math is, $5,000 in potential additional credit. The other point that I was going to make is sort of the number 6, the 2 sort of really significant things is one of the things that a lot of people really chastise the current structure of the federal EV tax credit is that it's you know, favors the wealthy, the other income, which in fact it does. Because you have to have that 7,500 or 5,000, whatever the tax credit amount is for your EV in order to offset it. So our elected officials in Washington got smart, and they've changed the tax credit from non-refundable to refundable, meaning if let's say you owned your tax liability is $500, you would only get, in the current structure, you would only get $500 worth of credit, not that 7,500. In the new structure, the IRS would actually mail you a check for $7,000. So you would get that full amount of that tax credit, or 15 or 12,500, whatever it ends up being. So that's huge. So hopefully that's clear. It goes to refundable, meaning even if you don't have that tax liability, the IRS will give you the sort of the difference to that full amount. The other point that's really important that people didn't like about this is that it is a tax credit. And so there's a portion of this that is still totally unclear how it's going to work. But dealers, so if you go buy from a dealer, they're going to have an option to basically give you the value of that credit at point of sale when you buy it. And so that's pretty significant because, again, if you bought an EV on January 1 and you do your taxes on April 15th, that's 16 months, right? You might wait 16 months to get the value of that credit.
Right.
And so now you can actually get it
at point of sale.
At point of sale, which is it's significant. And it's sort of an optional thing that you ask the dealer for and that type of thing. But I know that was a lot, but this is like, literally, as I said, like the number one thing that people always ask about. Were there any other questions on the tax credit before I kind of close out here?
Nope.
All right. So that actually was I just had last two sort of what I'm calling resource slides. And obviously their EVs are so hot. There's a million websites that are emerging, like, literally every day to sort of deal with all aspects of electric vehicles. But I put in two sort of, US government sites. This one is fueleconomy.gov. And so you can go in and you can actually, click on those different tabs there, fuel economy, safety specs, et cetera, and drill down. Some of the information is a little bit light, but generally speaking, you can find sort of, name, rank, and serial number about the different EVs, and then you can actually do a comparison. So you see off the right to add a vehicle. So if you're interested in like 3 or 4 different EVs and you want to see how they stack up in cost and range and and things like that, you can do that at this site. And then the other thing, sort of the last thing is incentives, right? I just walked through sort of the federal incentives and where that's going. Not all states, but a lot of states, and increasingly many states have their own. Most of them are not tax credits, but almost all the states. In fact, I don't think any state has tax credit. I think they're all some form of a rebate. California used to be $2,500, now it's $2,000. And they actually have 2 different ones, and so it's very confusing, but there's a couple of them. But a lot of states, New Jersey has pretty significant ones, Colorado, many states have sort of pretty good ones, and as well a lot of utilities will offer up like a $500 rebate as well, and you can also get incentives for and federal tax credit for the EV chargers as well. So there's a lot of ways to sort of skin this cat. So it's really important, if cost is a factor, to sort of take advantage of, I hate using that word, take advantage of, but take advantage of
Use your tools.
use your tools. They're there for a reason. But again, it's not just the federal tax credit, right? Remember that your state might have special programs and, and like I said, rebates and your utilities and things like that. So take advantage of all of that. And I know that was a lot, but excited to dive into a gazillion questions here.
Yes. So I want to thank Loren, and I want to thank him for this. Was very informative. And I know for some people, they may be feeling a little like, oh my God, like talk about drinking from a fire hose. This is a lot of information.
Yep.
Couple things to keep in mind. Number one, we will have this recorded, obviously, and it'll be up on our YouTube channel. For anyone who RSVP'd to tonight's event, we'll send you an email saying, here's the link. So that way you'll know it's up and ready when it's ready to go. We do a little cleanup, get rid of some of the dead air at the beginning and the end, et cetera. Put a nice little intro and that sort of thing. The other thing is subscribe to Loren's newsletter. Go to EVAdoption.com and make sure you're subscribing to his newsletter. Follow him on Twitter. And he's also provided us with his email, Loren@EVAdoption.com. The couple questions that have come through that were not touched on.
Yep.
So Jonathan asked, thoughts on solid state batteries and what that will do for EVs?
Yes, all right. I have lots of extra slides, so let's just and Laura and audience, I'm sorry, it's already like after 5:20. I didn't plan to go that long. So
Okay,
but anyway,
we'll move you along.
yeah. So I'm sorry, who was that asked that question?
That was Jonathan.
Jonathan, great question. So yes, so I have this as a game changer slide, but in interest of time, I didn't include it. But yeah, so solid state batteries. So for those of you, the really simple explanation is that solid state batteries use a solid electrolyte versus what other batteries have basically liquid electrolytes. And what that means, ultimately, I won't get into sort of what the technical aspect of is, but what solid state batteries lead to is the batteries will be ultimately 50%, 100%, potentially higher, more energy dense. So think about a current lithium ion, nickel, etc. battery that gets 300 miles of range. The same size battery that's solid state, might get 450, 500 miles of range and stuff. So, and they're safer, less risk of fire. They last longer. They charge faster. So they're truly game changing. That's the good news. The bad news is they're nowhere near ready to be in electric vehicles. They're at least probably 4 to 7 years out before we will start seeing them mass produced in electric vehicles. And the reason is not about sort of the technology, it's about how to manufacturing them. So that sort of there's a lot of companies that have developed these. It's how you actually manufacture them at scale, and cost is sort of the holdup. But as I mentioned earlier, I think solid state batteries, Jonathan, are that game changer. Like when later this decade, when these start to come out, that's going to be the thing that increases range, increases charging speed, reduces cost, and it's truly going to be a true game changer.
Great. We have a question from Linda. I see Volvo on the list of companies with EV models, but Volvo has had a long record of faulty electrical systems in its traditional cars. How will Volvo be able to compete in this space and improve quality with respect to electrical reliability?
Wow. So, Volvo, as many of you know, is actually owned by a Chinese company, Geely, who owns several other automakers as well. And they've launched Polestar, which is sort of their performance brand. So actually, not all, but some of the Volvos and all of the Polestar vehicles are currently made in China, but most of them are going to be made down in the South. I'm blanking. I think is it Alabama, Georgia? I forget which factory it is. Tennessee. Anyway, they have a big factory down in the South. So the first thing to understand is that most of the EVs from Volvo and Polestar in the future are going to be made in America. They're not today, most of them. A few of the plug-in hybrids are, but I mean, I don't know, how do I answer how an automaker is going to improve its sort of electronics, right? Like how does, Jaguar, Range Rover, who notorious English cars have issues and stuff. I mean, I think, part of it is just that electric vehicles, especially the entirely new platforms, are designed brand new from the ground up, right? And so, my assumption is that they'll either, figure that out, right, with the designing these cars from the ground up, because that's the beauty of the full battery electric vehicles. In most cases, is that these are not cars that are built on existing ICE powertrains, right, platforms. These are entirely new vehicles from the ground up. So, hopefully everything is designed to work incredibly well.
I think that's a good point, is to say this. It's not like you just took something that was gas powered and just replaced the engine. It's a whole different situation, and so that's a very good point for people to keep in mind.
I mean, it depends, like I showed on that one slide earlier, it depends on the model, right? Like you take the, the Mustang Mach-E obviously has absolutely nothing to do with the regular Mustang, right?
Right.
But the
Right.
Ford F-150 actually shares like 70% of the parts. The body, like there's a lot of it, but the actual powertrain underneath is completely different.
Right.
Yeah.
Reggie asks, do you think the technology will get to the point where EV battery charges as you drive it?
No, because that's physics. Physics doesn't allow that. The only way that can happen is so BMW had their i3, which they've recently discontinued. They had a version of it called Rex, or BMW i3 Rex range extender. So it actually had a BMW motorcycle little gas engine on it, and when you ran out of battery range and stuff, that little gas engine sort of had, like, I don't know, like a gallon of gas or 2 gas, something, and it would work as like a generator to recharge the battery, and I think it added like 50 miles and stuff. And just nobody else is really doing that, but we could see some automakers do that. There's some really interesting technologies. There's a French company that I've talked to their CEO, where he actually they have a battery trailer that, like, if you're going on a road trip, you can just like go and you stop off at one of their centers and and plug it into the back of your car, and you've got an additional like 150 miles of range, something like that, or 100 miles of range. I think I forget what the number is, but and there's also battery swapping, right? But I don't think that that's ever going to sort of take off for consumers. We'll probably see that take off for like Uber and Lyft drivers who, can, it's part of their routine, and they go in and it's worth it for their business, for their income to not sit out and charge for 30, 40 minutes or whatever it is and stuff. But no, I think the answer to was that Reggie, the answer to that the question?
Yeah.
Reggie, really is that increasingly EVs are going to have, by the end of this decade, right, almost every EV will have probably 350 to 400 miles of range, and they'll be able to charge at what we call 350 kilowatt. And so, you'll if you're going on a road trip, right, you're going to stop off, you'll drive 300 and 350 miles, right? And most of us need a bio break. Most of us want to eat. And so you stop off and, you eat for 30, 40 minutes, and your car is fully charged and you get back on the road. I mean, that's what we would do when we would drive down Interstate 5 to take my daughter to college or pick her up, is we would pick where we would stop to charge based on where we wanted to eat. Right? And so, like, and so oftentimes, like, let's say we decided we wanted to eat at Chipotle, it happened several times. As we're finishing and we're literally getting up from the table, the app would say your car is charged, right? And so part of it is just people have to rethink that this is different, and that you do other things while your car charges.
Absolutely. 2 more questions. One from Pat. Any thoughts on new companies and vehicles, such as Canoe?
Yeah, so there are, so if we just think about like the US, there are about a dozen legitimate to semi-legitimate startups. Everything, obviously Tesla, everybody knows. There's Rivian and Lucid now, both which are public and both have started delivering EVs. There's companies like Canoe and Fisker, and there's sort of several others. I put them into sort of about 3 tiers. Canoe I would put in sort of tier 2 as to how real they are. I mean, they have a pretty significant amount of funding, so I think they're probably real. And their focus is on both sort of delivery vehicles. So both on sort of the commercial side, as well as they have a really cool sort of pickup van type vehicle that's sort of very intriguing. But you know, there is, as we've seen with Tesla and Rivian and Lucid as an example, it costs billions and billions of dollars and takes many, many years to you know, design, build, and launch, and then scale, right? And so it's ultimately, it's that scale part that's really difficult, to where you start not building just tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of vehicles. So Canoe is really interesting, but you know, I think we're still, you know, probably 2-3 years away from knowing a company like that, if they're going to be a survivor and a major player.
Great. And then last question is also from Linda. How does the safety of EVs and crash tests compare with the safety of gas-powered cars?
For most all of them, it's significantly better, because of the way the sort of the EVs are designed. You have that sort of frunk up front, so you don't have the big gas engine that gets pushed up and crushes people inside, so it sort of collapses. But also the bottom of the vehicle, most EVs are what's called a skateboard, so that the battery pack and the powertrain also serve as part of sort of the construction and the underpinning of the vehicle, so it makes it stronger. And so many of the EV companies and, you know, the automakers are basically designing the battery tray to be part of the safety aspect of electric vehicles. And if you just, you know, if you just look at the Tesla models all have 5-star ratings. They're some of the, you know, the safest cars you know, on the planet, as is the Lucid. And so, you know, generally speaking, most EVs are actually as safe or safer than you know, comparable ICE vehicles.
That's great. Thank you, Loren. So I want to thank Loren one more time. I want to thank everybody for being here. This was so informative. Several people have put up in the chat that they're starting to look into their own purchases. So this has been super helpful. This again will be up on our YouTube channel. We will also have a link to it in our weekly newsletter, which comes out early in the week. So we'll have that as well, so that if you do miss the email, don't worry, don't panic, it will be there. If you go to buildtheera.com, you can get our link to our YouTube page there. All of our past events are there. If you want to become an expert on the infrastructure bill that is now a law, you can go there and see our what seem to be 150 different events associated with that. But in all seriousness, we have lots of great events. And if there is a topic that you are interested in, please email us at buildtheera@gmail.com, and we will work to bring folks in. Or if you know of an organization that is all about bicycles, or anything about mass transit, or anything like that, like one of the things we were talking about prior to the opening of the Zoom room was that we're not going to get to our climate goals with just EVs. This is about everything. It's a massive effort across the board. And so the more we know about, the better. The last thing I wanted to say, I asked Jan Donner to get me this tweet, which I'm now putting up into the chat. And that was from Michigan Representative Deb Dingell, who at a recent hearing at the Capitol said, asked a question about how the 110,000 fans at the Michigan Stadium would find adequate charging after a football game. And this goes to somewhat where Loren was talking in detail about how does charging actually work? How does the car hold the charge and all that sort of thing? So that slide that his daughter helped him make with the wavy line, that's an important one. As members of our organization, part of our mission is we want you to be able to amplify information. And now you have a lot more information than Joe Public in many ways. So please, next time Representative Dingell asks a question like that, don't be afraid to respond in an appropriate way, with courtesy and joy, but be able to say, maybe you need to come to one of our meetings, or here, watch this video. This will give you more information. And so I want to thank again, Loren McDonald. Please subscribe to EVAdoption. We are going to make sure we send you a thank you from Bill Diera, with our famous mascot, Rhonda, the roundabout. And so thank you, Loren, for everything. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. It was an honor to be on. I hope it was, I know it was a lot, but hopefully it was really helpful.
This is amazing. So thank you so much. And everyone, please make sure you tell your friends about Bill Diera. Follow us on all of our social media accounts, and keep an eye out. We're putting out some state-specific content. We started putting it out yesterday. Thank you to Tracy Seeley and Bill, who has been making the content. Tracy, who's been giving us the details. It's been great, and it's going to be a great way for us to put out there what the infrastructure bill now law gives for every state. And it also gives us the information on who voted for it by your state. So thank you guys very much for being here. And folks, have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Travel safe if you are traveling, and gobble, gobble. Have a good one.